What you're looking at here isn't a forgotten freeway or an unfinished road bridge. Rather, what you're looking at is all that remains of California's long-promised bullet train. These abandoned pillars and concrete arcs were meant to carry sleek, high-speed trains across the San Joaquin Valley at more than 200 miles per hour, linking San Francisco to LA in just 2 hours and 40 minutes. A journey that could have rivaled the greatest rail systems of Europe and Japan. Billboards promised speed, politicians promised jobs, and engineers promised a revolution in how California moved. This project was one of those rare situations where everyone seemed to truly be on the same page. And yet, after billions of dollars were spent, we now have little more than crumbling viaducts stretching through the nearby farmland. So what went wrong? How could a mega project approved by the voters, blessed by federal funding, and hailed as the future of American transportation turn into one of the most polarizing symbols of the modern United States? Stay tuned to find out as we uncover the story behind California's lost bullet train. I'm your host, Ryan Sokash, and you're watching It's History. To understand how California's bullet train ended up in this paralyzed state, we have to establish one important fact. California has always had an uneasy relationship with its railways. Basically, the elements of this landscape that have come to define its beauty have also created its infrastructural limits. Coastal cliffs crumble after winter storms, and fault lines slice across mountain passes, making building anything stable here very difficult. I mean, most of us have seen that footage of full houses tumbling down unstable cliff sides, so it's not a surprise that something like a rail line, which are hard enough to build under favorable conditions, present such problems. With that in mind, the 19th century brought California its first monumental rail project, the Central Pacific, the western reach of the Transcontinental Railroad, a daring feat built through sheer rock and back-breaking labor. Now, to make that passage possible, crews drilled through the Sierra Nevada using hand tools and black powder, tunneling through granite to connect the West with the rest of the country and hence the rest of the world. The costs were enormous, but the dream of unity was ultimately realized. And yet, this success was one of a handful, since the state had always struggled when it came to building rail network. For example, the California Southern Railroad, built in the 1880s, was repeatedly destroyed by floods before ultimately just being absorbed into a larger system. The Northwestern Pacific, meant to link San Francisco to Humboldt County, faced endless landslides through the Eel River Canyon, earning the grim nickname the Redwood Wreck. Even the mighty Pacific Electric, once the largest electric rail network in the world, succumbed to the automobile age, with its red cars scrapped and its right-of-way paved over. So when engineers began envisioning a new high-speed network for the 21st century, they were, at least to some degree, entering a legacy of failure. And although they were all well aware of that risk, the state's southernmost transit conditions forced them to at least try and make a change. You see, by the 1990s, California's highways were overwhelmed by population growth. Congestion in Los Angeles and the Bay Area was among the worst in the country, meaning the state needed a solution, something quick, clean, and efficient. Fast forward to 1996, and lawmakers created the California High-Speed Rail Authority, tasked with the unprecedented mission of building the first true high-speed train system in the United States. Their vision was bold. Sleek trains would rocket from San Francisco to Los Angeles in under 3 hours, cutting through the heart of the state and linking major cities with speed and sustainability. Then, just 12 years later, the voters agreed. In 2008, they approved Proposition 1A, authorizing nearly $10 billion in bonds to start construction. This law mandated that the trains reach at least 220 miles per hour and connected the Bay Area to Los Angeles in no more than 2 hours and 40 minutes. And it needs to be said that this project wasn't just about efficiency. It was also about political identity. California would finally build what America at large had never achieved: a real-life bullet train. Federal support quickly followed in 2009 when the Obama administration awarded $3.5 billion in stimulus grants, calling the project, quote, a model for 21st century infrastructure. Construction maps extended from San Diego to Sacramento, and by 2010, planners had created a corridor that would eventually exceed 800 miles. But beneath the optimism, the cracks were already forming. Negotiations with Union Pacific over shared rail corridors fell apart early. The freight giant refused to permit bullet train service from entering its right-of-way, forcing the state planners to redesign major sections through farmlands and small towns. And with that, environmental lawsuits started to accumulate. The local governments demanded reroutes and concessions, and from there, the problems only accumulated. And even though planners may have realized that the project was untenable, they began to build anyway. When ground finally broke in 2015, it felt like history had already been made, and the press coverage presented the story as such. Golden shovels were wielded by state officials who promised that this, at last, was the beginning of California's high-speed future. Excavators ripped through farmland, and what looked like forest of rebar sprouted from the soil. The plan was straightforward on paper: a 500-mile long, 220-mile-per-hour bullet train running from San Francisco to Los Angeles, with eventual extensions onto Sacramento and San Diego. Now, to accomplish that goal, construction would start in the middle of flat, open farmland near the San Joaquin Valley, before continuing north and south. That middle section became known as the initial operating segment, roughly 119 miles stretching from Madera to Bakersfield. For a brief moment, the progress was promising. The first visible structure, the Fresno River Viaduct, appeared in 2018 and rose above the city's northern edge. Soon after, the San Joaquin River Viaduct was completed in 2021, featuring double arches that towered over Highway 99. These arches were soon hailed by locals as the gateway to high-speed rail. Then the Cedar Viaduct followed in 2023, which was a massive 3,700-foot bridge carrying the future line across the state's busiest north-south corridor. In the meantime, over in Kings County, columns and girders appeared en masse as part of what would have become the Hanford Viaduct, the largest active site on the route. Now, although each project carried its own local controversy, the collective feeling was that maybe, just maybe, the bullet train was finally real. Meanwhile, amazing renders circulated showing glossy train carriages that were unlike anything previously seen in America, aerodynamic and capable of top speeds exceeding 220 miles per hour. Early proposals envisioned dual-mode sets that could run on electrified high-speed tracks as well as conventional rail, enabling through service directly into city centers. Furthermore, the promotional videos promised features that the California public strongly desired: carbon-free travel, energy from California's renewable grid, and competitively priced tickets. And so it was. By 2017, over 3,000 workers were on site, with hundreds of small contractors contributing to a growing web of bridges, underpasses, and rail beds. The scale was unprecedented for a U.S. rail project. Now, politically, it was always a balancing act. Governors from both parties defended the vision, though each quietly scaled back their own scope. Then, matters worsened as federal reviews continued to delay and local opposition grew. That's right, the lawsuits moved faster than the speed of a bullet train, pun intended. And then, just when hope was almost lost entirely, the federal government came to California's aid in late 2023, reaffirming its support for the project by granting yet another $3 billion to keep the construction moving. The funding indicated progress, but insiders realized that even with it, the numbers were becoming unmanageable. Budgets had soared well past $100 billion at this point. Remember, it started at just 10. Delays and environmental permits amassed in the hundreds, whereas entire sections of the route, especially those in the mountainous north and south of the valley, remained only rough sketches. Still, at this point, perhaps a touch foolishly, the construction continued, until finally, the bubble burst. The numbers no longer made sense to the point that reality caught up to the dream. Not to mention, the deadlines no longer matched the political rhetoric, and everyone knew it. Meaning, the first real cracks showed up in the ledgers. You see, internal reports revealed that land acquisition alone was taking much longer than expected. Property owners refused to sell, farmers went to court, and eminent domain battles kept piling up. A state of affairs that cost California millions per month of delay. Then came the environmental lawsuits, hundreds of them, each demanding new studies, hearings, and revisions. And then, in addition to all this, counties filed their own lawsuits as well, accusing the High-Speed Rail Authority of ignoring local impacts. Public meetings grew heated, and the optimism that once surrounded the project turned sour. At the same time, and this is actually somewhat hard to believe, the cost continued to balloon much further. Remember those early estimates of 10 and then 33 billion? Well, it went to 40, which could be expected. However, those numbers were eclipsed by projections exceeding $100 billion. By 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom attempted to salvage what he could by announcing that California would finally reduce its ambitions. Instead of focusing on the route from San Francisco to Los Angeles, he emphasized a shift to a 171-mile test corridor near Bakersfield. That section was already under active construction, and so the governor called it, quote, a proof of concept. Even so, to many, this sounded like outright concession. A concession followed by something even more challenging, when the federal government changed its tone. You see, during the Trump administration, the Federal Administration of Railroads, the FRA, accused California of missing milestones and violating grant terms. Hence, in 2019, Washington moved to revoke $929 million in funding and demanded repayment of earlier grants. The dispute escalated into lawsuits, press releases, and conflicting narratives. California blamed politics, and Washington blamed mismanagement, and round they went. Though, after a few years passed, the Biden administration restored the funding, and that renewed hope, but the relief didn't last, as at that point, the project was beyond salvation. By 2025, a 315-page FRA audit painted a very grim picture, citing, quote, unrealistic completion schedules, a $7 billion funding gap, and structural uncertainty over when or if any trains would ever run. The audit conclusion was devastating. It stated that without radical change, the project was, quote, unlikely to achieve operational readiness within its projected timeframe. Soon after, the federal government took decisive action, withdrawing roughly $4 billion in unspent grants and redirecting the funds to other national projects. It was the final nail in the coffin of this huge mess. As you might imagine, California vowed to fight back in court, but on the ground, the impact was immediate. Contractors demobilized, workyards emptied, and the once busy construction zones were basically left abandoned. And now it's time to have a look at what was left behind. If you drive along Highway 99 between Fresno and Bakersfield, you can't miss the remains of California's bullet train. They rise suddenly from the fields. Skeletal viaducts, half-finished embankments, and miles of graded earth that lead nowhere. More specifically, the Fresno River Viaduct still stands, solid and intact. A concrete arch originally built to carry trains out of the city at full speed, it was the first structure finished back in 2018, yet it has never carried a train. Further south, the San Joaquin River Viaduct crosses Highway 99, 4,700 feet of arches and elevated railway, built as the official gateway to high-speed rail. This is a modern marvel of engineering, yet it's a complete waste. Beneath the arches, valley traffic rushes past, and people are more or less oblivious to the bridge above. Then comes the Cedar Viaduct, completed in 2023. 3,700 feet of reinforced concrete that rises over the freeway south of Fresno. Locals sometimes call this the bridge to nowhere, since it leads into nothing. Actually, I guess California has a few of those, don't they? Anyhow, over in Kings County, the sprawling Hanford Viaduct extends across farmland. Its huge columns still stand like ancient ruins. It was intended to be the largest single structure on the route, but after the 2025 federal withdrawal, construction halted completely. The work equipment is gone, and only the fences remain. And finally, near Avenue 17 is another completed overpass. It's been inspected and is deemed ready for use, but it sees little traffic, aside from the farmers who occasionally drive tractors underneath it. Together, these fragments form a broken map, and with any hope, someday someone will fix it. Officially speaking, the California High-Speed Rail project hasn't died. According to the state, 119 miles of trackbed have been graded, and 463 miles of the overall Phase 1 alignment have been cleared for environmental purposes. In technical terms, it's still active. In practice, though, it's in limbo. However, if recent history has showed us anything about this particular rail project, it might be best to take the dream with a touch of skepticism at this point. Although I know I'm rooting for their success, as the last time I was in LA, I took a train and let's just say that it left something to be desired. Maybe next time I'll take one of those weird rental scooters instead. Anyways, that's the story of California's lost bullet train. I hope you liked the episode. I hope you'll consider subscribing. And until next time, this is Ryan Sokash signing off.